All right. Well, hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for the City of Loveland's education event tonight called Budget Funds Explained. For those of you that I don't know, I am Nicole Yost, the City of Loveland's Communication and Engagement Director, and I will be the moderator for tonight. Can you go ahead and get the first slide up? Just a reminder for everyone attending, this is a hybrid event. So we have both in-person attendees. Thank you all for joining us in person. We also have attendees joining us through Zoom. Welcome. And we also have those following this presentation live and engaging with us on the city's Facebook page, as well as our YouTube page. So thank you all for joining us. So the goals of tonight's event are for attendees to learn and ask questions about the information presented and about the city's budget. We're not gathering input tonight. For those of you attending in person, if you did not get a card already at the front door, please go grab one. But you're welcome to use those cards to take notes throughout the presentation, document any questions that you might have, and save those for the Q&A session. For those of you joining us virtually, we also recommend that you jot your notes and your questions down before we get into the Q&A period. We do need to adjourn promptly at 6:30 p.m. tonight ahead of the Rialto's Foot Lagoon concert series. So next slide, ground rules. So my final piece is we have some ground rules for our educational event today. Please save all questions for after the presentation and keep side conversations to a minimum. Respect each other's opinions, listen to each other respectfully, and refrain from personal attacks. And with that, I will turn it over to City of Loveland Chief Financial Officer, Brian Waldes.
Thank you, Nicole. Thank you all for coming tonight, and all of you online. Thank you for joining. My name is Brian Waldes, Chief Financial Officer for the city, about 2.5 years now. And tonight, we are here to talk with you all about what we call our budget basics, or our budget roadshow. We've been doing a few information sessions around the community, and our goal is to ensure the distribution of clear, consistent information about what the city does and how we do it. In other words, what services does the city provide and how do we fund those services? How can we accomplish this goal? Well, by getting out into the public, by producing materials like you're going to see tonight, and also by holding events like this, where people get an opportunity to ask questions after listening to some of the information we have to present. So the first thing we want to talk about when we talk about the city and how the city provides services is our general fund. The general fund provides most of the services you think of as typical government services. As you see on our screen here, we point out that for more than 70 years, the City of Loveland has been what we refer to as a full service city. What do we mean by that? Well, as you see the pictures here going right to left, the city not only provides your basic life and limb services, right? Public safety, transportation, and things of that nature. But as we move to the left, we also see the city provides infrastructure, transportation, services, plowing the streets, filling potholes, and things like that. So again, your infrastructure, public safety, very basic, necessary government services. But the general fund also provides for a lot of the services that inform Loveland's character. In other words, the things that make Loveland Loveland. As you look, again, continuing to the left, you'll see the Foot Lagoon concerts. We can hear them tuning up outside right now. You see the library, parks, we have the Rialto, we have the museum. We have a lot of the services that make Loveland Loveland. The things that people really love about our city are also funded through the general fund. So the general fund has a very broad array of responsibilities, of funding needs. Again, everything from public safety all the way to the things we really love about our city. So we understand what the general fund does. We're going to talk now a little bit about how our fund structures are organized. It's important to understand that the city provides a lot of services, not just the services we looked at in the general fund, but also other kinds of services. If we look in the middle of our slide here, you'll see we have enterprise funds, right? The city also provides your water. We provide electricity. We have a great broadband service, Pulse. If you're not signed up, get signed up. We provide a lot of other, I know that was a laugh line. We provide other great services all through enterprise funds. So those services are funded entirely separately from the general fund. And it's important to keep that in mind, that those services you saw in the general fund are held separate from water services, from our electric utility. So if we have an issue, let's say in the general fund, say we don't have enough revenue, we can't raise water rates to fund those general fund services, and vice versa. We can't increase taxes to help the enterprise funds, to help the water fund. And that is the logic of our fund accounting structure. That is best practice. And again, there's a logic to it. It does get a little bit complicated because you end up with these different fund categories, but it's something we all need to understand, that the general fund provides these services, but it is separate from a lot of other things the city does. We just talked about the enterprise fund. There's even a third category called special revenue funds. Those are similar to enterprise funds in that their revenue cannot be shared outside of their function. And special revenue funds include things like our marketing fund that exists on our lodging tax. And it's that same principle. It's like an enterprise fund, except instead of fees, it has a special revenue, a special tax, our lodging tax. And the same rule applies here for your special revenue funds. Special revenue funds can't share their money with the general fund and vice versa. So those are important distinctions to keep in mind. Here on this slide, we have a listing of the services that are provided on the left. You'll see by the general fund. And then on the right, you'll see we have our enterprise funds, and those are much simpler, right? They have kind of one function. They're kind of unitaskers. You see those enterprise funds, you have things like wastewater, pulse, our water and power utilities, and that's all they do. And when you look at the general fund, you'll see, well, it's more general, right? It provides a lot of different services. Something you'll notice is that in our enterprise fund list, we have the golf fund. It's important to note that the golf fund exists as an enterprise. No tax dollars go to subsidize golf. I always say it twice. No tax dollars go to subsidize golf. It exists very much like any other golf course in that it exists on its own fees and does not share revenue with the general fund. Now, there's an exception to that rule. Something else that's important to note very quickly. Since these enterprise funds do exist as businesses, they do receive services from the general fund. So they pay for those services through an allocation back to the general fund, because we don't have payroll people or city attorneys in all these different funds, right? We serve those funds. I serve as the CFO for the utility funds and things like that. So we have an allocation back to the general fund for that time we spend administering business for enterprise funds. So how does this fund structure impact our finances? How does this actually translate when we take a look at what resources the city has available? Well, when we look at this slide, we are looking at our forecast ending net fund balances for our general fund and all of our utility funds. And the good news is we have we have a lot of resources here. We've got $155 million here, $151 million and change, give or take there. And again, that's a lot of resources. So we might say, hey, you have $150 million. Our general fund is about $120 million in and out every year, 120 to 130. So you might say, well, that's plenty. If you have $150+ million, you should be in very good shape. But we have to account for that fund structure we just talked about. So as we take a look at the pie chart, yes, we have those resources available, but where do most of them belong? They belong to the enterprise funds, because the enterprise funds have big fund balances. That's like your cash in the bank. And that is a good thing. That is good news. The good news is that we have adequate fund balances in our enterprise funds, such as water, power, pulse, and they need to have those fund balances for capital projects and operations, but in particular for capital projects planned and unplanned. We say if somebody backs into an electrical transformer, next day we're out $1 million, or we're going to have service interruptions. So your utility funds have to have these larger fund balances to account for those kinds of emergencies, but also planned projects. So that is good news. It is good to see that we do have a lot of resources not part of our organization. And while our enterprise funds are experiencing a lot of challenges with inflation, supply chain issues, and all the other issues that businesses are facing today, they do have a good fund balance. So once we account for that, then we take a look at what's left for our general fund. And you'll see on this slide, those green slices, and if you add up the two green boxes, we end up at about $17.6 million for the general fund. Now, again, that's a good chunk of change at 17 million, 17.6, but that top green box informs how much we keep in what we call our contingency reserve. The contingency reserve represents 2 months of operating expenditures for the general fund. And the concept is if we do have an emergency, we can release those funds into the community overnight. An example of this, and the last time we did use it, was in 2013 when we had the flood. We were able to release money into the community overnight. FEMA and other government agencies are going to come help you, but they often provide that help on a reimbursement basis. So this is a best practice. You will find, I don't know of any municipalities that don't have some kind of contingency reserve in their general fund and other funds as well. This is 2 months is a reasonable amount. Again, is a best practice. And the good news is at $17.2 million, we have that fully funded as well. We have not touched the contingency fund. We haven't used it to supplement operations or anything like that. So that is also fully funded. The challenge comes here in that middle green box where you see we have what we call an unassigned fund balance of $357,000. Again, that's a lot of money. However, when you have a general fund that operates at about that $130 million level in and out every year, that is not a big margin of safety. So if we have an unanticipated expense, if we have a decline in revenue, right, it wouldn't have to be that large relative to the general fund to put us in a situation where we'd have to be deciding what to do as far as meeting that challenge. So we've talked about our bank account, kind of our checking account. That's the money we have in the bank and how it's distributed amongst the different funds in our city. Let's look at our income statement now. Okay, where does the money come from to provide these services? Well, the general fund is primarily funded by tax revenues. And the primary tax revenues are sales tax and property tax. In terms of orders of magnitude, and what's our biggest revenue source? It is sales tax. Sales tax was initially budgeted for 2024 for our general fund at $65 million. Right now, we're projecting about $53 million because of the impacts of ballot 300, which excluded food for home consumption from our sales tax base. So with that in mind, again, initially at 65, now at about 53, your next biggest revenue source in the general fund is property tax at $16 million. So you go from 52, 53, all the way down to 16 for your next revenue source. So that puts in context how important sales tax is to our general fund. And when we look at our sales tax in terms of where we rank or how we compare with our friends and neighbors here on the Northern Front Range, you can see that at 3%, which was a rate, incidentally, that was established in 1984. So it has not been increased in 2 generations. And then when you combine that fact with our exclusion of food for home consumption, we have functionally the lowest sales tax base in the Northern Front Range. We have an equivalent sales tax base with our friends in Wellington. They have that same rate at 3%, and they exclude food for home consumption as a statutory town. But Wellington, as we know, does not offer the same service portfolio that Loveland does. All those things we looked at in our general fund, Wellington is a great community, but again, it is not the same service model as Loveland. Yet we are currently sharing the same sales tax base. These circles that you see on the map are relative, are scaled for the different rates. So you can see as we compare with some of the other cities around our region, again, Loveland is at the lowest, especially when you consider that we have the food for home consumption excluded from our sales tax base. Every other municipality, again, with the exclusion of Wellington, does include food for home consumption in their sales tax base. So that makes us an outlier in that sense, and again, makes our sales tax base functionally lower. You can see up there in Fort Collins, our friends up there do have a bifurcated sales tax rate where they charge a lower rate for food for home consumption and a higher rate elsewhere in the city. But again, no one else in our region has it excluded. So let's take a look at that second revenue source, property tax. Again, big drop off from sales tax to property tax. We have that same map here where the circles are to scale. And you can see in our little box there on the left, our mill levy of 9.564 mills, that was established in 1992 and has not been increased since then. So they tell me 1984 was 2 generations ago. I have trouble believing that, but it's been at least a generation and a half since the city of Loveland has had any kind of change to its revenue sources. Again, these circles are to scale. You can see our friends in Berthoud and Timnath have a lower property tax rate than the city of Loveland. We are very similar to Fort Collins in terms of our mill rate, but after that, everybody is above our mill levy rate. Something else that's important to remember. We all got a little bit of shock when we got our property bills this year, right? We had that reassessment. We had the increase in property tax. First thing that's important to note, that function is performed by the county assessor, not by the city. So we receive that information just like you all do. Second, what's important to note is that the city of Loveland, in your kind of standard property tax bill within the city, is only 12% of your property tax bill. The majority of your property tax bill goes to the school district. You can see those two blue sections of our ring chart here all go to the school district, which is the way it's supposed to be. School districts don't levy sales tax. They can't. They only have property tax. Next in line would be the county at 28.25%. Again, the county has a very low sales tax at 0.8. So this is all in accordance with kind of how things work in Colorado. Your school districts are usually your biggest mill levier. And then you'll have the county. Typically, your municipalities are last. Other than, we have some other smaller entities performing very specific functions in the county. But that is important to note, because I know when people see their property tax bill, they have to pay that bill. They say, oh, the city must be getting a lot more revenue this year because my property tax bill went up. Well, that's not the case, because again, the city is only 12%, 12.4% of that property tax bill. We rely on sales tax. So when we combine these factors, when we take a look at where we are with our sales tax and where we are with our property tax, and we put those different rates kind of through this word problem we have here. Let's say we have somebody in a $425,000 assessed value house. We have about $13 in kind of walk around retail spending and $4,600 spent on groceries. What we do is we take a look at applying our different rates for all the different municipalities here and see where we land in terms of what we call our revenue model. And as you can see from this slide, Loveland comes out dead last in terms of our revenue model. That is a function, again, of our lowest sales tax rate in the region and our pretty low property tax rate, right? Where we're third from the bottom, kind of tied with Fort Collins. So that shows that for average activity in a particular municipality, Loveland has the lowest revenue model of any municipality by a little bit, actually. So where does the money go? This dollar bill pie chart shows how your general fund money, your sales tax and property tax money that you remit to the city, how it's spent. Okay, fully 39 cents on the dollar, or 39%, goes to public safety. And in this instance, for this slide, that's just police and fire. So the plurality of it, right, the biggest chunk goes to public safety. That next middle square shows internal operations and support. We kind of combine that with executive departments at 3 cents. We add them up, we get 23% for what you might consider your administrative load. That's admin, right? And between 20 and 25% is generally considered best practice for a municipality. That top right square is 15%, 15 cents on the dollar for transportation. Something that's important to note about that money is that it's very highly leveraged. We get a lot of grant money, matching grants and things of that nature. So we get a lot of purchase power and services provided for that 15-cent spend, because we get a lot of grants, but you're required to have some skin in the game when you get those grants. So that's why we have a budget there, but again, punches very much above its weight. The bottom right corner, we have our community partnership and support services. Those are our services for friends in the community who, again, might need some assistance programs or things of that nature from the city. Economic development and planning at 5 cents or 5%. Those are our partners who bring in great projects, employers, businesses to the city. And that bottom middle section at 16% or 16 cents is parks, recreation, library, cultural services, the Foot Lagoon concerts, the Rialto, the museum, and on and on. Those are where those services that very much make Loveland exist. And again, that's 16% of your general fund spend. Okay, we're going to move on now. We're going to talk very quickly about TABOR, the Taxpayer Bill of Rights. As you may or may not know, TABOR has been a part of our Colorado State Constitution since it was improved in 1992 by a statewide vote. However, TABOR does have a provision where you can separate from certain aspects of TABOR, but you need an election to do that. That is called separating from TABOR. And what do you separate from? Well, TABOR has a lot of provisions in it. It does, for example, require voter approval for tax increases. You cannot separate from that aspect of TABOR. Excuse me. We're also required to have a vote to issue debt in a governmental fund. You cannot separate from that aspect of TABOR. But what you can separate from is what we call the revenue formula for TABOR. And what TABOR speaks to is your revenue, total revenue for your governmental funds can only increase year over year to the extent that you've had inflation and population growth. So you combine both of those growth rates, and if you exceed that with your revenue growth, then you have to refund it to the taxpayers. I do air quotes when I say refund to taxpayers because TABOR is infamously silent as to what is a refund and what is a taxpayer. Because in the case of the City of Loveland, for example, you can see on that fourth bullet point, we are, as we've said, separated from TABOR, and we'll talk about that in a second. But had we needed to refund some of our overage, okay, of revenue based on that formula, we would owe a refund of $15 per person for 2025. So that's our most recent result. Now, as a city, what is a refund? I've read an example where one municipality gave everyone in their community a free day at their rec center. Because they had a low dollar refund amount due, you are allowed to deduct the cost of delivering that refund to taxpayers from the refund. So in this case, it might cost more than $15 a person to get 80,000 checks out to, again, I'm gonna do my air quotes, to taxpayers. Because who's a taxpayer? Is it anybody who's paid sales tax in our community? Is it just people who pay property tax? It's not defined. So that aspect of TABOR can be complicated. But that is the aspect you can separate from. This slide shows that the vast majority of communities in that bottom right corner, those shaded in counties are separated from TABOR, from the revenue aspects of TABOR. And they did that through elections. If you see our little pie chart here, when there are TABOR questions, TABOR separation questions on the ballot, they pass 87% of the time. So there's been a lot of separation from TABOR throughout Colorado. Here in our neighborhood, kind of that same neighborhood we looked at before when we were looking at tax rates, you can see those green dots indicate TABOR separation elections passing or succeeding, okay? Some only have one. For example, Fort Collins, separated from TABOR in 1994, they did it permanently. So they never have to have another election. In our case, you can see in Loveland, we separated from TABOR, but we did it with a sunset. And so it has sunsetted several times and been reapproved several times as well, up until 2023, when it did fail, not by much, but it failed last November. Now, we are not under TABOR yet. We don't expire till the end of 2024. So we have one more chance for an election here in 2024 to stay separated from TABOR's kind of revenue formula. So when we do keep the money, where does it go? Well, in our TABOR ballot question, it speaks to what that money can be used for. And it can be used for transportation, public safety, and parks, open space. And over about the last 20 years, the city has retained $51 million of taxpayer refunds. And that equates to about that $15 level, about $2 million a year. So rough, but there are a lot of ups and downs. So it's, again, not an exact science, but roughly that $15 a year. The city feels it's very important since that is your money as a Colorado taxpayer. You have a right to that refund. So we treat it separately, right? It's almost like we have this deal with our citizens. The citizens say, okay, you keep it because That is our desire for the city. But we as the city say, okay, and here's where it goes. And every single cent of those refunds that are withheld go into these programs. And again, that's been to the tune of $51 million over the last 20 years. What's it been used for? Well, you can see for police, about $7 million. In parks, $7 million as well. Public works is where it mostly goes, and it mostly goes to street rehab. So basically, when we keep your TABOR refund, because you've said we can, we use it for the streets. We use it to fill potholes. We want to use it for something that I think we can all agree on, and we want it to be extremely transparent. Where does your TABOR refund go? Where did your $15.71 go? It went to fill potholes and keeping our streets in good condition. So that is our TABOR discussion. So right now, we just want to talk quickly about our efforts to communicate about our budget and our city's financial condition. What we are doing is a lot of direct engagement, like tonight. We've also done a lot of boards and commissions. We had a super commission meeting. We've done presentations, and I'm sorry, a super commission meeting is when all the commissions were able to attend. We had that right here in chambers. We've also done presentations to community groups and organizations. We've had some information booths at local special events, farmers market, things like that. And we also will go out to speak to smaller groups. So to all you watching online, you people here in the chambers, if you have any interest in this presentation being given to a PTA group, a softball team, a block party, you name it, please contact us and we'll see what we can do. And we'll try to come out to talk to you because we believe it is that important that we really get this process or maintain this high level of communication. We also have made improvements to our website. So please come check it out. We have got improved access to our 2024 adopted budget through this new program we have called OpenGov. We have easier access to our general budget through the Let's Talk Loveland platform. And again, you can get to this all easily through our website. And we're always looking to do additional improvements as well to communicate both actively with the citizens, but also to put a lot of information on our website and make it available. Other platforms we have is we have Budget Watch, where we have the development of reader-friendly financial documents. We also have flyers and other information, again, all posted on our website. So if you're ever curious, fairly easy to navigate, come check it out. So that is our presentation. That is the Budget Roadshow. You've seen it. That's our budget basics. And now
Now the fun part. Can
All
I
right.
have the slide clicker?
Yes.
Thank you. Thanks, Brian, very, very much for that information. So we're now going to shift over into the Q&A portion of this event. We have a little bit more than 30 minutes for questions. Remember, this is a hybrid event, so we have both in-person attendees online. So here's a few ground rules that we have for today. Because we have limited time, we do ask that all participants participate with purpose. That's something that we share at all of these events coming from our comms and engagement office. Questions, please direct your questions specifically to the presentation and the budget information, as those are the guest experts that we have here today. And then please help us get through all questions today by limiting your question to one question at a time. If your question has been addressed already, we ask that you please save time for new questions so that we can hear more questions in the time we have today. If you are in person and have a question, please line up at the podium. That will give us an idea of how many people and how many questions we have in person. For those of you attending virtually via Zoom, Facebook, or YouTube, drop your questions into the chat, and our amazing virtual moderator, Logan Garcia, will be gathering those and sharing those up to me. Because of our hybrid environment and based on the questions, if we have a mix of in-person and online, we'll switch. We'll do a few in person, a few online, and vice versa until the end. So let's see. I think that's what we have. So this will be afterwards. All right. So if you are in person and you have a question, please go ahead and line up at the podium. If you are online and you have a question, go ahead and drop those in now. All right, we will go ahead and start with in-person questions. And because we're all here today to learn more about the budget, would love to know your name and your question. Go ahead.
I'm Leanne. I'm a Loveland voter. I'm not sure what ward I'm in, but I'm on 34 in Wilson. I'm really concerned about a lot of the budget cuts that you all are talking about. I completely understand why, because of the food tax. And a lot of people don't realize that it would have such an impact. But I do know that the city council can do a ballot initiative of raising the sales tax, not food. I, as a person who's on Medicaid and I'm a teacher, I would really appreciate if you would consider doing about the sales tax initiative to save our services. I really think that it's going to hurt a lot of people by making these huge cuts that you're planning.
Thank you. And did you have a question for us today, since that's our
Do
focus?
you know if that I hear rumors that there are several council members who aren't interested in doing a sales tax. Are we planning on doing a sales tax increase?
You want to answer that, Brian?
Thank you. That's a great question. That is a big topic of discussion right now in 2024 is what are we going to do about our revenue shortfall? And council has not made any decisions yet, but council does have the power to refer a ballot question to the ballot. And that is a topic of discussion coming up on July 23rd. So next Tuesday, or this Tuesday, we will be discussing that with council. And again, that is entirely up to council if they wish to refer that to the ballot for this November.
So are they taking community input?
It is a study session. So there will be opportunity for public comment on that item this upcoming Tuesday.
Thank you. And I will say, just for the time being, if you have another question, maybe get back in line. So we'll do 2 more here in person, and then we do have a few online, and then we'll come back in person. Thank you so much. Go ahead.
I have a point of clarification that I didn't quite hear from you, Brian. What is the entire general fund budget income anticipated yearly? Did you say 130 million?
Yes, it's about 132 million, give or take. Of course, it
Just for the general
changes.
fund.
That's just the general fund.
Then do you continually put money in the contingency on a annual,
Sure.
biannual, whatever?
Great question. What we do is we take a look at our budget for that year. So let's say, going into a particular year, your budget becomes, for argument's sake, $120 million, right? So then you would have to say, okay, I want to do 2 months of that. And I've given myself a very hard math problem just standing here. But that would be about $2 million, right? Because it'd be $1 million a month and you want 2 months. So what you do is you take a look at your budget for the upcoming year and you take 1/6 of that or 2/12 and you adjust your contingency fund balance to that amount. So then you would have to fund it if your expenses went up to that extent, or you could deduct from it if your expenses go down into a particular year. But it gets funded once at the beginning of the year and then it stays there.
But the general fund is 130 million anticipated coming in.
Around that number from all sources.
Thank
Yes.
you. Yeah, welcome. Thank you. What's your question?
Nate Seitz, resident in Loveland. Just curious, what's the conclusion from all of this? It seems like you're associating a lack of increase in taxes as a bad thing, or maybe that's kind of what you're inferring.
Yep, no, that is a great question, Nate. What we are saying is the only thing that we are saying for sure is that we can't stay here. In other words, we are going to have to make a change, right? From the presentation you've seen, we don't have money in the bank to buy time, so to speak. And we have this upside down income situation. So when you combine those things, we either have to lower program expenses, lower expenditures, or increase revenue, or a combination of the two. But as staff, all we are saying is this is the situation. It's up to council and the community to work through which route they want to go.
And so then in your role, do you provide guidance to council members and the mayor regarding upcoming projects, just from a fiscal standpoint?
Sure. When we discuss them at council meetings, if a particular project's coming up, has a price tag on it, we'll say how we would get the
Thank you,
funds.
Nate.
Yeah.
So we'll actually shift to online and come back because we've got 5 online questions right now. We'll go through 3 and then we'll circle back. And if you want to get in line, please do.
Okay.
Yes, thank you so much. Okay, so we'll get to you in just a moment, Linda. We have a few questions online, Brian. And Molly, our Deputy Chief Financial Officer, is also here for any of these questions. The first question is, when you note that the city's sales tax and mill levy have not increased, isn't it important to note that these taxes increase naturally with inflation, even while the percentage point remains the same?
That is a great point, and they do. And that is a concept that, okay, your 3% sales tax rate was set in 1984, and the population, who knows what it was back then, let's say it was half of what we have now. And we say, okay, well, now you've gone forward, you've doubled the population, but you should have also doubled your amount of sales tax just through inflation and natural increases in economic activity. And that's true. So as things increase proportionately, you're in good shape. But there's a couple of concepts or principles in there that make it a little more complex than that. For example, when we add services to the general fund, we provide a lot more services than we did back in 1984. And what I mean by that, we won't have to look too far back to see the advent of a new service, our encampment response, right? When we had a lot of issues with situations in our public spaces, the community said, hey, we want to see this addressed. So that became an additional service in the general fund. And when you start adding services like that, then that kind of growth, your organic growth, if you will, from your revenue sources, doesn't account for that. So yeah, that is true, but there are complicating factors to that as well.
Thank you, Brian. Next question from Patrick online. What part of the budget pays for all of the Loveland cars and trucks, so our fleet services?
Great question. That is functionally your general fund. It's done through our fleet fund, but I'm trying to think, well, if it's a water truck or if it's an electrical truck, right? Then those will be paid for by the enterprise fund that uses it. But in the case of your general fund departments that have vehicles, it's the general fund that pays for them.
Thank you. All right. Last online question before we turn it back over to our in-person audience. This is from, let's see, Paul. You mentioned that the public safety section of the budget includes both police and fire. Are these services tracked separately? And if so, what are the proportions of the budget dedicated to each?
Good question. Yes, they are tracked separately. The PD is higher than the LFRA, than fire. I should know both numbers better than this. I know the fire is around 20 million and PD is up near 30. I would have to, and I apologize for not having that better in my head, but PD is more than LFRA. We do track them separately. You can find that information on our website, and I apologize for not knowing that better, but PD is certainly more than the LFRA, and they are tracked separately.
Thanks, Brian. All right, we'll turn it back over in person. Please ask us your question.
Thank you, Linda Rosa. I represent a few citizens who were frustrated that we couldn't find out how much sales tax is lost to developers. That never shows up in the general fund because the city wasn't giving us the figures on use tax waivers, TIFs, and I believe you even mentioned that the uncollected tax at Centerra amounts to about $4 or $5 million a year. So what we did is we compared the state and the city sales tax base, which is quite, they're very similar with a few small deviations. And it's even more so because the city is now taxing food according to the state guidelines. So the tax base is very similar, and they're both taxing at 3% sales tax. But when you compare them, you find that the city is $5.8 million less than what the state is collecting. And that was for the first 4 months of 2024. So that is what we suspect that money goes to, $1.6 million a month, or extended 19 million in 24, that it goes to developers. We'd like to know how you explain that difference.
So if your question is, what drove the difference in the analysis that you did, I couldn't really speak to it without seeing it. But I understand the concept you're talking about. For example, when we have tax sharing agreements with a developer, that money comes out of the general fund. It doesn't come out of the general fund because it never comes in. And again, when those projects are conceived, the idea is to split the revenue from just that project. So not from other revenues in the general fund. So to quantify it using the methods you were using, again, I would have to see it. That seems kind of, might have some
Theoretically,
issues, but,
would you agree that that's?
oh,
valid?
again, it's, so I would have to see it. I would have to see it first. So,
Thank
No,
you.
I'm saying theoretically, would you say that that is a sound way to look?
I'm saying I would have to see it
Okay.
Yeah,
first, though, but thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank
Thank
you
you so
very
much.
much. Hi there.
Hey, Nicole. Hi, Brian.
Hello.
Jen Castaneda, Loveland resident. So one of my questions is, you'd stated on slide 19 that $7 million annually goes to the police department of the TABOR funding. And I'm curious, is that on top of the 30 to 32 million that the police department gets annually already?
Yep, that's a great question, Jen. That 7 million is over the 20 years.
Over 20 years.
Yes.
But
And-
it is on top of the annual amount that the police department receives
Well,
from the
it
general fund.
was because the PD kind of, I mentioned very quickly at the end there, really it's all functionally, it's all going to transportation right now. It's going to street rehab. So I honestly don't know the last time PD was funded by TABOR override. But that $7 million was the total over 20 years.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank
Welcome.
you. Welcome back.
Nate.
Welcome back, Nate.
All right.
Thanks. I'll have to dig into the reports more, but can you kind of share, I've never looked at it before,
Okay.
overall gross revenues from all tax sources, the last 2 or 3 years? Like our total revenues increasing?
Yes, they have been going up, especially as inflation was influencing sales tax in particular, and you know about the reassessment from property tax. But remember, in government, one of the fun parts of this job is that the factors and influences that have upward impacts on our revenue almost always have upward impacts on our expenses, be it more people,
Well, like a
inflation,
growing economy, right, would raise our revenue, right?
right, and would increase the need for services as well.
Okay,
Right.
all right. Okay. So our expenses are growing faster, and to put it simply, right? Our expenses are growing faster than our revenues.
If you let them, they would.
Okay.
But yeah, that's a constant.
Thank you,
exercise.
Nate.
Okay. and
All
so
right.
I
Sorry.
just la-
We've got some online
just wanna
questions
bring
about
up,
15 more minutes. Thank
I
you,
know we're
Nate, so
considering
much.
a
We'll
homeless
be right
shelter.
back to you. We'll be right back
Those
to you,
can
Nate.
cost like $60,000 per person per year. If you
So
put a
Nate,
shelter in that-
sorry,
Okay.
if you could please be respectful. We have some questions online in only about 15 more minutes.
wanna bring
We
up-
will have time to be back in front of you. I really appreciate that, Nate. Thank you so much. All right, so we have some back to our online questions. The first one from Donna. Donna, what happened to the will of the people when they voted on this already regarding food tax? I will just say, you can add on anything if you need to. I will just say, as city staff, that's really not a question we can answer other than the city respects and honors the will of the voters. Our next question is from Janet. Is the homeless tent city shelter funded out of the general fund?
Yes, it is.
Great. Thanks, Janet. Next question from Matthew online. How much tax income does Loveland lose annually to Fort Collins and Berthoud in missed cannabis sales? Do we know?
Oh, well, I don't know. That would be a very hard number to get to. So, yeah, I know that council is considering permitting the sale of marijuana in the city. That is another item that will be up for discussion on the 23rd. So we do have some analysis on what we think the city might gain from different levels of marijuana excise tax, but they're very loose estimates, admittedly, and it's very difficult for us to try to determine how much is spent elsewhere that would be spent in the city. So great question, but I do not have a great answer.
Thank you so much. We are back to in person. Go ahead with your question, please.
Hi, Linda Breen, and I'm a Loveland resident. My question is about something I read recently, and that has to do with the amount of sales tax that would need to be increased to perfectly compensate for the grocery tax. And what I had read, if you could confirm whether this is right or your argument, what I had read was that 0.75% was the estimate for what it needed to be increased to perfectly compensate for the food tax, but that you were proposing 1.25%. So the reason for my question, I guess, is that I've been hearing some pushback on tax increases from citizens, and it seems to me like a 0.75% increase, if that's the exact compensation for the grocery tax, would be easier to pass and should be able to keep our services. So just wanted to see if you could confirm those numbers or if there's an argument for 1.25%.
Well, first thing is staff hasn't proposed anything. Okay, it's council asking us to bring back analysis of different rates. And when we do discuss this on Tuesday, we'll be looking at everything from 0.5 up to 1.25. As far as that first question, what exactly would offset the loss from grocery? That's a moving target. Our initial analysis was that about 0.57 might do it, but that number can move. So trying to aim for it that closely might not be the best way to look at it, because you would invariably either fall short every year or have other situations like that. So you should definitely watch Tuesday, because that discussion will happen in depth about the different rates and the different philosophies behind the different rates as council discusses it. That's a great question. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We have about 14 more minutes for questions. Yeah, please share your question with us.
Okay. Well, good evening. My name's Darren Barrett. I had one question already got answered, so thank you very much for that. So I'll move on to my next one. I had to change it a little bit. How are you calculating, or what kind of data or criteria are you using to determine a budget shortfall?
Well, the first thing we're doing, Mr. Barrett, is to look at what the impact of the removal of food is. And so what we're doing is we have a deduction box on the different sales tax returns for our local vendors, and we simply add up what the deduction for food for home consumption was for every vendor, and that informs what the impact of the ballot measure was. So that helps us understand that piece of it. Now, the rest of it's a little more complicated because, okay, if we're going to be down between 10 and 13 million, which is what we're projecting, we think that's going to hold. Well, what are the other revenue sources going to do relative to how we budgeted them? Because, for example, let's say we end up 10 million short because of 300, right? And for argument's sake, use tax goes up 10 million. Okay, great. Now we've covered that hole over, but remember, our expenses grow every year. Our revenue sources are supposed to grow every year. So just filling the hole isn't enough. You kind of have to fill it and then account for the natural gain, kind of similar to that other question that we just had about, doesn't inflation and population growth pay for service growth? It's that same concept. So should we have some other revenue source shoot up, which we're not seeing occur, okay, that would cover it over. But again, by going backwards, or not just losing what we lost, but also the growth each year.
Thank you so much. All right, next question.
Hi, George Carclips. I've got a question about what you had said about investments in infrastructure and everything else, that is something that doesn't come into the general fund, and so you don't count it. Everything that I've read, there's not much difference in accounting if you forego collecting something that you're supposed to collect or if you give it away. The net effect is the same. And what I have not been able to find is a line item or an accounting of all of the tax forgiveness and the leakage out of the budget, because the city has chosen not to collect it, even though other places have paid it. Is there a reason that the city chooses not to have that line item available to the public?
Well, that information is all in our reports, and it's in a different fund. It's not in the general fund. It's in Fund 603, which is our LURA fund, because LURA is the board that does those agreements with the different developers. So in the Fund 603 report, you can see what the tax increment sharing provisions are. Because like you said, if you forgive something you're supposed to collect, isn't that a deduction? But the general fund was never supposed to collect it. And all of those transactions are recorded in the 603 fund.
I'm looking at the whole thing, CEFs,
It's
Building-
totally different. Yeah.
but that's part of the budget. And those are things that are forgiven and not shown in a line item.
Mhm.
That's leakage.
Depending on the deal, yes, there's been CEFs. I don't know. Sometimes we can waive those. Yeah, depending on the different deal, you can find that as part of those agreements if they've been approved by council. But I'm looking for where the CEFs were forgiven. We don't put that in, every budget.
Thank you. We only have one more online question and it's super quick, so I'll answer that and then we'll come back in person. From Tom online, great presentation. Is it available on the Loveland website so that I can download it? Quick, short answer, yes, this recording will be available on our letstalkloveland.org/budget webpage. It is also live streaming on Facebook and YouTube, so you'll be able to find it there. All right, so thank you looks like we have no more online questions. Let's turn it back over in person.
Howdy. Thank you for doing the courtesy of having this meeting. I'm still concerned. I believe you spoke at the meeting of Sizzler I attended. I still am having trouble getting my arms around why, when we're having this discussion, are we continuing to waive for how many years? Sales tax at your biggest retail center. Makes no sense. How much money are we losing this year because food tax being waived?
Our projections right now are between 10 and 13
Cool.
million dollars.
And how much money are we not collecting from the area's biggest retail center? An operator, by the way, we're doubling down on over at another development. So how much money are we leaving on the table?
Are you talking about Centerra?
Yeah,
I don't know the exact numbers, but in Centerra, we share the sales tax with developer. Okay.
no, the
So,
developer
can I-
takes half the sales tax that all of Loveland should be getting. Am I correct?
No. The city of our 3%, the city retains 1.75. The city
Right.
shares 1.25 with the developer. And what's important to note about that 1.25 is that is restricted use. It can only be used to build infrastructure out there. So when we share the sales tax from only that project, not from the whole city, it's just from the sales tax that developer's project generated, then we keep the 1.75. And right now, I'm going to give rough numbers. That's about 3.84 million that the city gets every year from Centerra, right, to service the development. The developer proportionally gets less than that, gets the 1.25 and must use it for public improvement. So for streets, the utilities underground and things of that nature, things that will actually be given to the city after they're completed. And the city says, okay, these are in good shape. We'll take them. Now, then we have to provide for their maintenance, right? But after the expiration of the deal, we get all of the sales tax. So we would see an increase to our sales tax of about $3 or $4 million. So we do share the revenue from these projects, but only the revenue from the project itself. If you go, since we're talking about Centerra, if you go to a store, right here downtown, that doesn't go to Centerra. All that money goes to the general fund.
And I did just want to go ahead, Brian. I just wanted a quick time check. We've got 7 minutes time for 3 more questions after this. Doesn't look like we have any more online. So if you're joining us in person and you'd like to speak, I'd love to see you at the podium now. Thanks.
Yeah. But so that revenue is shared with the developer, right? With the philosophy being, okay, we wanted to see this project develop. There was a lot of good public improvements to it. We agree to help fund them, but only the public improvements. The money that we share with Centerra does not go to the developer. All right. It's not profit margin. Again, it's only for public improvements.
Okay, so they take their tax money that should really be going to the municipality. They spend the money to improve their own property, which at the end of the day escalates their value, and it's effectively, and it's there, no offense to you, you've done a lovely job of answering my concern. But we're essentially going over and subsidizing this stuff. And where I have problems with it is when you want to go over and sit there and hyperventilating over not charging people for food that they eat. And then I sit there and I go over there to a failing strip mall and we're building another one. I look at that and I'm like, yeah, we're paying for it. I don't care how we wrap it. But We are paying to fund and subsidize improvements on private property at the expense of the hardworking people of the city. I don't care how we go about it. There's something fundamentally wrong when we're sitting there and elevating trust fund babies and their developments over people eating, or people going to a library, or people having to shelter in a library because they have no place to live. You're not responsible for it. Very few of the people here have culpability for it, but it should never, ever, ever be allowed to happen again. And maybe if we raise the bed tax and the rent-a-car tax, you could use that as a pool of money to pay a guy $1 million to put an office building here that he probably was going to put in here anyway. Thank you. You guys have been wonderful.
Thank you so much. We have about 5 more minutes. And Nate, I know I cut you off earlier. I would love for you to ask your last question during our time. I appreciate your flexibility, but we'll get to you. And if we have one more chance, I'd love to be able to address your question. Go ahead.
Linda Rosa. One thing information I couldn't get from the city is that the food tax repeal is now still being called up to a $13 million loss. However, the city decided to follow the state guidelines and continue taxing a lot of food for home consumption. Still, it's takeout food, home delivery food, deli food, any prepared food, candy, soda, vending machines, convenience store food. How much is the city this year still collecting from food that citizens would normally think is food for home consumption?
So I guess I'll address the principle of the question first. The city adopted the state sales tax base. We mirrored the state sales tax base because that was in the spirit of the ballot question, was to reduce the tax burden for food for home consumption. So we felt it was in the spirit of the ballot question. Also, from a practical standpoint, if you go and start making up your own sales tax base and start saying things like, oh, to-go food shouldn't be taxed, but just in Loveland, right? You start to differ from that state sales tax base, and which is also the same sales tax base for the county. You create a nightmare for your vendors, right? And also, again, kind of going back to my first point, the logic of it is that this is food for home consumption, food you bring home and prepare, to put on the table, not food from a restaurant or food that's already been prepared. For example, in a convenience store, a lot of that food in there is
how much you're collecting from it.
We do have time for one. We just got one final online question. Nate, I'm going to hold you to, if you do have one. Okay, thank you so much. Okay, so our last question of the evening comes from Rebecca online. I'm wondering why we saw such large increases in budgets in departments like city manager from 2022 to 2023, which was an increase of more than 2 million, but we're not really reducing from those departments first.
That's a great question. Do you want to tell them, Nicole?
Well, we have some great information that we've been sharing with city council on that, but the city manager's office, who is ultimately in charge of providing a balanced budget to city council, they had worked on a methodology with all of the city's leadership team. And at the core was, what does a city at its core need to provide? And so as an organization, there are certain things that every organization, every city still has to continue doing. And so there is a hierarchy, and I believe we have that on our Let's Talk Loveland budget page. That's part of the methodology. There is more information from the city manager's office on that, but that's ultimately something that has been discussed by city council over the last few meetings. And I'm not sure if that's something we'll be readdressing in an upcoming meeting.
That's part of it, but that increase you saw and great analysis of the budget. I love to hear citizens looking at the documents that are online. A lot of that increase was the encampment program. That's where we put it. We put it in kind of city manager's office. We wanted it at executive level. And also our great OCE office started and is in that same area. So we started a new program, But the majority of that increase that you saw, again, good eye, was the encampment program. That's where it resides.
The city's communication and engagement department.
We live in acronyms.
Is that it?
I don't know. It's 6:30.
Great. Okay. Yeah, I do think we do need to be done to respect the concert. So Logan, could you possibly advance the next slide for me? I can't seem to do it with my clicker. So I want to just thank everyone for joining us today. We are considering some additional budget events over the next few weeks. So stay tuned to our Let's Talk Loveland page and City of Loveland channels and communication channels to learn more about some of what those look like. And as Brian mentioned, the budget is a very important conversation that's happening between staff and city council. So please pay attention there. So don't forget, if you had any questions that you weren't able to share tonight, drop off your note cards. We are looking at those. We will be adding some additional questions to our Let's Talk Loveland page, which is available for all of the public to understand some of these. Follow up, we have a lot of different ways for you to engage with us. We've recorded this meeting. It will be available on our Let's Talk Loveland page, lovegov.org/TV, which is our Loveland TV channel. And it will also, excuse me, I don't have my glasses on, be rebroadcast on Pulse TV, Channel 16, Comcast Channel 16 and 880. And fun fact, Loveland TV is now on Apple TV and Roku for those of you. So more access to public meetings. So you can scan that QR code to hear more. And thank you all so much for joining us today. Have a great evening.
Thank you.